Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Search, Deploy, Commit. I'm here again today as your host, Jack, and I'm here with the Reefer Man, who is a really interesting player that I met over a Diplo game, and he had a really interesting format, so I really wanted to have him on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, hey, I know we'll kind of get into, your game hosting abilities and some of the things that you've done inside of Warzone, but fill me in a little bit on, yourself and how you came to join Warzone. I always like to ask and hear
Oh yeah,
stories about how people
uh,
got started in the game.
the name escapes me, but I started with Warzone's predecessor. I think it was Warlight.
Warlight. Okay.
Yeah, and a buddy of mine in high school, he showed me Warlight, and I was like, gosh, this is awesome. And I started playing it, and I was hooked ever since. And I would join these Diplo games, and like I had no idea what I was getting into. And it was really the RP aspect of these games that really drew in my interest. And
Mm,
I actually never started making maps until Warzone, but it was the same deal there. I just love the role play.
nice. So it was a friend from high school. Do you guys still play consistently together, or is it sort of something you've just continued on with?
Um, he was playing for a long time, but actually this year he kind of dropped out.
Okay.
Life has been getting busy for him.
Of course. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think what's cool about the game is you can come back pretty easily too if you'd ever want to.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously I want to ask, how did you come up with the title of the Reefer Man?
So I was a stoner for a while, but I always tell people that it's a reference to an old song from the 20s by Calloway.
Huh, that's really interesting.
It's an interesting song too.
I'll have to look that up and pull up. I feel like I feel like that's a song I should know. Is that a pretty widely known song, or is this something that?
He's done another one called Minnie the Moocher that's way more widely known.
Okay, huh? That's really interesting. Well, now we'll all have to go listen and find out. So,
Definitely.
so when you started playing the game, you were doing Diplos right away, right? Is that what you're saying? You were doing Diplos and role playing and
Actually, it
uh,
first started off with me and my buddy were just farming levels off each other.
okay, gotcha. Just getting up in levels so you could have more access in the game.
Yeah, and I think it was I don't remember the game, but he was the one who started getting me into the multiplayer.
Okay, gotcha. So then it kind of just went from doing that first to get more access and then starting to play in more multiplayer games. How did
Yeah.
you get started as a game host? I know you said you started playing Warlight and then it changed into Warzone, and that's about when you started. Like, how did that begin?
So it was honestly I joined a Diplo, and I don't like to call people out like this, but I did not like how the host was doing it.
Hmm,
He basically just hosted, gave himself the biggest slot, and
gotcha.
it was a pretty grudge match, a grueling war, and I came out of it as like I can do better than that,
Hmm,
and I honestly I love history, and I started building these off of from a historical mindset,
hmm.
and I've just really loved it ever since.
That's great. Do you remember your first map that you started hosting?
I've hosted a lot. Um, Not really.
Okay. No, I was just out of curiosity. And I guess so my next question was going to be where your ideas come from as a game host, but it sounds like history has a pretty big effect on how you set up your games or maybe even a futuristic mindset but with a historical background, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I love history. I've done both world wars.
Hmm.
I've wanted to do a Napoleonic War, and I've done some based off video games.
Hmm. Okay,
Um,
gotcha. Sure.
yeah,
So some video game theme obviously and then, Napoleonic War, I think that would be really interesting. That's not something I'm as quite as informed on, but definitely a lot going on during that time. When
Yeah,
you
but
set up, oh, go ahead.
with that area, a lot of big nations, and I like to keep my
Mm,
players a little smaller, have really big games.
gotcha. Do you prefer to have like a large player count, or do you prefer like, I mean, is 8 to 10 perfect? Like, what would you say you prefer?
I like to go above 20.
Okay,
Like I like to get a lot of people in there, so as many people can have fun as I can get.
okay. Maximize the fun, right? Makes sense.
Exactly.
So when you set up these games, what kind of planning, like how do you go about determining it's going to have this set of rules, or uh, I'm sure some of it's history based, but like even cards, I think when I host a game or try to host a game, there's just so many options. How do you set up your games? What is your sort of thought process as you're going through the whole thing?
Well, usually I like to try to recreate a certain era, like be it World War One, World War Two, even Cold War. I start off with what the how the situation looked on a map, and I do a little bit of tweaking and for simplicity's sake, and I just throw it out there and let the game run. And then once the game's finished, is like, how could I improve?
Hmm. I mean, as far as improving, do you feel like some players are really vocal, or like when they share something, like how do you manage some of those feedbacks that maybe aren't great, uh, and apply it to your next games?
A lot of the feedback that I've gotten has been about how the were set up and how they can change. Like
Hmm.
when I was first started hosting, I had like really complex rules, and it just wasn't very feasible to manage.
Hmm.
And over time, I've really drawn back as how many rules I've laid out there, and it's honestly gotten really basic with the rule set.
Hmm. So like, give me an example. Like basic rule set would be just.
Declare before you attack. Respect alliances. Like if you have an alliance, you got to break the alliance before,
Hmm.
and no gift blocking. And that's pretty well the three rules that I've consistently used nowadays.
Stuck with. And maybe just for somebody that's not familiar with gift blocking, maybe just a quick explanation as to what gift blocking would be called,
Oh yeah.
or what that looks like.
So let's say you were Spain and you were at war with Italy. You would have a neutral player. You would gift a neutral player a piece of land in between you and your enemy, and it would kind of just complicate things because now Italy would have to declare on that player to even get access to Spain, and
Gotcha.
it's just not very fair.
So forcing a war almost between another country and yourself by gifting them in, hence the title gift blocking.
Yes.
Okay. And, obviously, one of the main things I really wanted to have you on here for was one of the games that you set up. I think it was probably our first game together that I connected. Maybe we had played in other matches together. I'm not really sure, but it was this idea, and we're still we're still in the middle of this game,
I
so I don't
know.
know how legal this is, right? Alliances and things that are being made in the game. But tell us a little bit about your slow start and how you set that up. This idea of a slow start Diplo game.
Yeah, so I had started off making games where players would just start in like one or two territories and just spread out and take over stuff.
Hmm.
But like you would end up with these mega nations and these mixed in with these really tiny nations, and it just really wasn't too fair. So I had set it up to where you would start off. I tried to make them evenly spaced with like 5 or 6 territories making the same income, and everything else was neutral. And all those neutrals would have 10 armies on them for you to really be strategic about where you expanded to maximize your income.
Right. So basically, starting out with very, very high, just base positions. So it's not so easy to just quickly jump into one space and then all of a sudden the map gets filled. But instead, your income's low. You have to decide where to put your resources to expand. And then obviously, if it's a commerce game like this one is that you set up, you have to decide if you're going to build cities or not versus expanding. So I thought that part of the game made it really, really interesting. And obviously, kudos to you for coming up with it. I haven't seen anything like this, and maybe it's been around for a while, but really enjoying the game currently. I think it's a long game, obviously, but I think for people that really enjoy long games, I think it's a really cool idea, and I think more people should be aware of this type of creation. So thank you for setting that up.
Of course. Like I really am enjoying this game. It's turning out to be one of the longest games
Yeah.
I've ever been in. Like we're on turn 101 right now,
Right.
and it is nowhere near ending.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think some people. I mean, and this game in particular, you know, uh, there's so many cities being put up. I've never seen this many cities before, and after a while, it started to feel a little bit like a chore to do the cities. But the big scheme of the game, I think, is it's like worth it to just continue playing, from my perspective. So my feedback would be, great job, and even just the way alliances are set up and the way things go inside the game, I think is really, really interesting. And I'm not going to try and get into details here because, God forbid
Yeah,
we
it is
set
an
up
active
something.
game.
we do something to affect the game on this podcast. But yeah, I guess, to continue on this conversation, is there any stories maybe from past games or, moments? Because I think in any diplomacy or role playing game, the reason that people play this version of Warzone is the stories, right? So is there
Yeah,
anything that stands out to you, maybe from a previous game, like a story or something that happened? Maybe if you just share
yeah.
your favorites.
I was playing. I think this is the second longest game that I was in, and I was Ukraine,
Mm,
and like I was aggressively expanding for a while, trying to make as many alliances as I could to back me up. UK was getting really big, and I had an alliance with Germany,
mm,
and Germany was the strongest player in the game, and it ended up being me and Ukraine. No, sorry, me and UK fighting for the rest of Russia after they had dropped.
mm,
And what I'm really proud of is I was the underdog. Like UK had way more income than me,
sure.
but I still somehow managed to win the battle and take
Mm.
Russia.
And did that end up forcing uh, a game win at that point, taking all of that land?
I would have, but honestly, a bunch of people kind of forgot about the game and people started dropping.
Gotcha. Which, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe, I mean, I think those moments, right, in unfinished games, I think about one Diplo game that really got me hooked on the genre, this format of the game, and I didn't even win. Like, I was probably one of the final players, but I was nowhere close to winning almost, right? But just some of the memories that are made or part of the stories that happen, I think is interesting. How do you think we could improve upon that so that the games maybe either finish before people, become uninterested or booted? What are your thoughts on, the Diplo community sort of having a known problem with this?
Well, some of it is just simply commitment, but of course, like
Hmm.
life gets busy, and I understand that.
Yeah.
Um, for a while, I was using an automatic boot,
Mm,
and I had a conversation with a buddy of mine who was like, life happens, and I'm sorry I got booted, but had shit I got to take care of. And I was like, I understand that,
mm,
and I honestly stopped using auto boot.
hmm,
I know I waited a long time for people, and they would take their turn.
mm.
Life happens. And that's
Right.
something I feel like other people should realize, that this is just a game. There are far more important things out there. But we, as long as we stay committed to the games that we're in, it'll be worth it.
Right. So you're recommending we maybe take off the auto boot, or maybe make it longer, or something to help keep or give those opportunities to players that are taking a longer time to make their turns.
Yeah.
Because you're right, life happens.
And like before I ever decide to boot someone, like I'll actually see when they're active. Um,
Mm,
I do think about the level they are. Like I'm more likely to boot lower level people because it's harder for the lower levels to really get into it. I kind of feel
mm,
a lot of level blocks in the game.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. What are maybe some tips? Obviously, we've talked a little bit about it, but talking about new players, I think everybody that's committed to Warzone wants to help new players more so in the game. What is something you think would be a good tip to share for somebody that's newer to Warzone, or maybe somebody that's interested in getting into Diplo role-playing games, but they don't maybe know how to start hosting, or maybe even just start playing in a Diplo game? What's some tips you could share?
Well, I'm always a history kind of guy, and if you're going to play a certain nation, I would definitely recommend doing a little research on their history.
Hmm.
Like I'm an American, and I play UK sometimes, and I've had to do a lot of research, like on UK laws and stuff like that, just so I could better role play it effectively.
Hmm.
And another thing I feel like is if you're really wanting to get into these role play kind of games, just go for it. I know a lot of people who have gotten into it have been kind of awkward at the start, but then they turned out to be some really good role players.
Hmm. So just give it a shot. It's not as bad as you think it is.
Nah.
So I guess I think that's a great answer. As a longtime player, I mean, at least the last couple of years, I know you've been playing. Uh, what are some things you would like to see improved in the community or in the game itself? I mean, obviously, as a game host, there's lots of things that you have control of at your fingertips. But maybe what are some things you've been like, I wish I could have this for the game, or I wish players would do this, or what's something you'd like to see more of?
Two of my, well, one that really isn't a peeve, but my first one would be the chat system. I
Mm,
could see a lot of improvements coming through the chat system, making like an alliance chat, just like whole chat sections that can be created and deleted by the players would be really nice.
huh. Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. An alliance chat, so you could set up sort of a sub chat with certain groups inside of the game instead of
Mm-hmm.
having to jump out to Discord or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's smart.
Um, there is some stuff that gets done by mods, like the Alliance mod. I don't remember what it is,
Oh yeah.
but just something that would make it a bit easier to keep track of who's allied to who's at war with who. Because back to that Europe slow start game, it's been going on since March,
Yeah.
and if there was more players than it is now, it would be really hard to keep track of, even for me as
Mm,
a host.
right. Yeah, and I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the 200 player host interview that I had, but they talked about. I mean, they have spreadsheets and a whole Discord server. Like it's a lot going on, and I think you're right. Some of these things that could be improved upon in game would be uh, a great improvement for players, just to help set up some of these massive stories that you guys are creating.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you can kind of do it when you set up the game is I'd like to see logistics play more of a role.
Hmm.
Like if you're fighting someone and your army's getting circled, like you could just deploy troops right on top of that circle. But I'd like to see surrounding troops play more of an effect on the more strategic side of it.
I see. So you're saying if you were to surround one location, there would be an attack bonus for
Yeah.
something like that. Interesting. Hmm.
And like the way I've dealt with that is through local deployment games where you actually have to deploy in your bonuses, and then you have to manually move all those troops there. If something gets encircled, you're not going to be able to get any more troops there.
Huh. That's a really interesting idea. I mean, and I'm going to ask you a question because I've tried to host a couple games. I shouldn't probably let that get too far out. But yeah, I've tried, and some of them I've really wanted to set up local deployments, but depending on the map, sometimes it's hard to make sure you take off all the massive bonuses. Um, are there any specific maps that you've found it's easier to use local deployments on?
Smaller maps, definitely.
Okay.
I find local deployment games can't be really big. They got to be smaller player count because, like, I've thought about going through like the big maps and like manually changing all the overlapping bonuses,
Sure.
but I've just decided it'd be too much work for just too much work for it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I figured I'd ask your opinion because I think local deployments really good setup for maybe a Diplo game because you're right, it affects where you put your troops. Holding those positions is far more important than and you see that in games like Medium Earth from a competitive standpoint too. So I think it makes it really interesting. What about Warzone, for you has really stood out? Obviously, we've probably talked about some of these things, but there's so many games, and like you said, life gets busy. But what is it about the game that keeps bringing you back to play again and again?
First of all, it's the stories that like we as players generate in those role playing games. Like I find those very interesting. Like there's this one game I think you're in where I am the UK and we're playing with basically nuclear power and turning people into mutants and making it like Fallout. And like, where else would you find that?
Right.
And then there's just the experimentation that goes on with the maps too, like all of the different kinds of games players host. Like you wouldn't find that anywhere else.
Yeah, the creativity from the game host that comes out, obviously like yourself, I think just makes Warzone so unique. So thank you for being a part of the game, and thank you for sharing your ideas. I look forward to seeing the end date of our game. What do you think? You have a guess for when our game will end? This slow start game. We've been playing since March. It's now August. We're 100 turns in.
Honestly, like I could see it going to turn 200, if not 175.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think, and everybody. I mean, I think you're right. In some ways, everybody in the group's got to be committed to some level, right? And I think this group is, at this point, right, we're all pretty committed. So,
like, I know I had to recently boot someone from that game, which honestly sucked because it was really late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a balance between booting people and then keeping the game moving.
Yeah.
And that's honestly one of the hardest things about being a host is maintaining that balance.
Right, and making sure you're doing right by everybody else that's playing. And I would say, you're doing a great job as a host, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast. And thank you so much for joining me on here. Obviously, going to continue playing together.
Definitely.
But we'll definitely see you on the battlefield. And thank you for joining me.
Of course, thank you for having me on. I can't wait for more battles to come.
Right, exactly. And thank you all for listening to the channel. Please check us out on YouTube and all of our other socials. We're definitely looking forward to continuing to create more Warzone content for everybody. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.